Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me today are our two regular commentators, Viewmeisters, and let me introduce them. On my left is Don Cooney. Don is a professor in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University, and he also serves as a Kalamazoo City Commissioner. And on my right is Regena Nelson, who is a professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies at Western Michigan University. Just got back from a trip to Costa Rica, visiting her son. So it's good for us to get together again. As you can see in front of us, we won an award. Regena, you weren't here to help accept, and Don, you were out of town, but Daniel Smith and John Provancher and I came to the Public Media Network award ceremony last Friday night, and we were presented this award. As you can see in front of you, the Power of Voice Award, presented to us for narrative impact. And so that we quite thrilled to accept that honor on the behalf of all the people who work on this program. I want to first thank our excellent production crew, Daniel Smith, Larry Mahannah, Bob Kildea, and our great floor director, John Provancher. They're the ones who really make this show possible and even manage to make us look pretty good sometimes. And I think it's important to also acknowledge our two current commentators, Don Cooney and Regena Nelson, but some of the past commentators that we've had on the program. That would include Denise Keel, and we hope to, keep roping Denise back every now and then for an appearance. She was with us last time. Lynn Bartley. Lynn was the host of the show, the program for many, many years, did just a fantastic job. Rick Stallhut was with us at the beginning. Felix Brooks was a major contributor at one point. Lee Ford was a commentator with us for a long time. And of course, we've had many, many wonderful guests over the years, including, Don and I were chatting before the show, Senator Carl Levin was on the program, Senator Debbie Stabenow, Governor Jennifer Granholm at the time, and we had William Hartung, the expert on military budget. Don, you were very impressed with the peaceful families, right?
Right after 9/11, we had on here two parents who had a daughter that was killed in the 9/11 thing. And they were so impressive. They belonged to an organization called Peaceful Tomorrows. And this was before the United States got involved in a retaliatory war. And they were urging no war, not in our name. And they were so impressive. Even though they had lost their daughter, they said, stop the killing. They were just powerful.
And we've had many wonderful guests like that on the program, people that are traveling here to talk or make a presentation on campus, and of course some of our local folks that at the university that we tap on all the time. Paul Clements comes to mind as one we've had on the show many, many times. So thanks to all of those folks for helping to make Critical Issues the program that it is. Don, you want to give just a little history of the program, because this show goes back to 2001.
Yes, we really came together right after 9/11 in an effort to stop the war before the war started. And Ron, you had done a program on campus on social justice.
Yes,
and
WMU Forum.
Yes, yes, and I had done one here on Liberty and Justice for All, it was called. And then we came together and we decided that we really had to do something to stop this war before it began. And I remember doing a program here, we had this room filled with people from Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War who were speaking out against the war and trying to stop it. And then we just took off from there to talk about issues of social justice for the last 20 years. I wanted to speak especially about our first program director, Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien was a man of the people. When he was very young, he took a job at one of the paper factories here. And he worked there for 30 years until they shut down. And Bill was then well into his late 50s, and he didn't have many other skills that would help him get decent jobs. And he was a poor guy. He told me that his pension was $37 a month, and he was struggling to survive. But Bill never paid attention to that. He just paid attention to the issues of justice, and he always encouraged us to speak out on these, and just was a wonderful guy. And at that time, we were doing it every week. We were doing a program every single week, and it was just great. I got to know him and his family. I spoke at his funeral. I was involved in his daughter's wedding, and he was quite an inspiration to me, and I think to the community, in his dedication to social justice.
He was quite a character. Quite a character. I have very fond memories of Bill. So on Friday night, when Daniel and I accepted the award, and John, when we accepted the award, we did pay tribute to Bill O'Brien as the first producer and director of the program. So I think also what I wanted to say about this award is that it helps to establish the idea that alternative media is really important, right? The mainstream media does not present all the issues in their true historical context, doesn't present all the facts and analysis that we need. And of course, corporate domination of the mainstream media is one of the reasons why it performs so poorly most of the time in helping to really inform American citizens. And so I think it's really, really important that these kinds of institutions like the Public Media Network exist, and programs like ours are able to broadcast on that network. And I think it's just really an important thing to happen in our society. Yeah. Really necessary. So
I just want to mention one other guy that was instrumental here, and that was John Spire. John Spire he managed the first campaign I won on the city commission. He's the guy that got me involved on a board here at Public Media Network, and I was on the board for 21 years, and I took a 2-year break, and I'm back on the board again. But he was a big advocate of what you were talking about, Ron. A vehicle for people to speak out and tell the truth to combat the lies that are out there in the mainstream media.
And there are so many. It's not just, I mean, there's the usual culprits, Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting, two of the worst offenders in terms of corrupting the media ecosystem or ecosphere in our society. But of course, there's political campaign ads and just everything, or so many things that you can look at online on the World Wide Web. And so there's just so much disinformation, and so many lies and distortions flooding the information ecosphere in our society that it's hard to fight through all that. It's hard to fight through the fog and find out what's really there, what's really true. To see things in terms of evidence and logical analysis, and that's just not present for the most part in the media ecosphere. And so that's why Public Media Network and programs like ours, I think, are so important.
Yes.
We try as best we can to always present factual information, to present that with a logical analysis, a critical analysis, and I hope we do that job. And I guess the Public Media Network thinks we do, because they gave us an award for narrative impact. Well, let's turn to one aspect of that corrupted information system in our society, and that is the current slew of campaign ads. I think I want to talk about the election itself, but I increasingly over the years just have been so disgusted with the political ads that are put on television, because almost always they're based on lies and distortions and not presenting full information and guilt by association and just all kinds of other things. And so I've just really been upset with these ads. And you feel the same way, I think, right?
I do, and I know it's for shock value. You get people's attention for like what, 10, 30 seconds
Yeah.
or something like that, and you want to make sure that you grab them, and so they do go out of their way to distort things to make sure that they have that shock value. So it does make it difficult for the, if you have an opposing view to come back with a positive story, that doesn't stand up. So I think people have to get into the fight, and they do this. And how do we change that? How do we turn that around?
Yeah, you get into a mudslinging contest, and everyone ends up splattered with mud.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Or just, I mean, again, can you analyze briefly the campaign ads for the abortion issue, Proposal 3? You want to talk about
Yes,
Proposal 3
yes.
today a little bit?
Exactly. So, because in our state, Proposal 3 is, reproductive freedom for all. It's very clear about what we're trying to do. However, because the opposing view wants to make their point, they are saying the extreme could happen. When you change regulations or you open it up, that anything related to reproductive rights is on the table to be analyzed, they're going to the extreme view to say this is the worst that could happen. But we know that we do have state regulations that would not let that happen. Things like parental consent or live birth abortions. They're going so extreme to tell that story to make sure that people go to their side. So that's just one example that you've seen in the ads where you see people sitting around a table bringing up these issues that would never happen here, but they want to put that out there to scare people. Yeah.
Their memes in the campaign have been too confusing, too extreme.
Exactly.
Well, they're trying to cause confusion by stressing extreme positions that would almost never happen.
Right.
So
Exactly.
that's their way of contributing to the disinformation out there, right?
Yeah, I saw a sign the other day that said, vote against Proposition 3 because it says nothing about stopping sex with children. It has nothing to do with Proposition 3. But there's a sign right there, and people see that. Say, oh, wow, I'm against that. Yeah, right. Totally distorted.
Well, one of the areas that I'm very concerned about in terms of campaign ads is the issue of crime. Because, for over 50 years, this has been a position of the Republican Party to try to smear Democrats, to try to portray them as soft on crime, to try to weaponize the issue of crime. And it always has a racial undertow to it.
Yes.
It's always a dog whistle for racism in the society. And this has gone on for 50 years. I mean, we could probably go back even further, but let's just start with Richard Nixon in the 1968 campaign. Nixon was ranting and raving about law and order, we need law and order in our society. And it was part of his Southern strategy. He had a very explicit strategy to appeal to the racism of Southern white Democratic voters and to try to woo them away from the Democratic Party, where they had traditionally been since the Civil War, because of the Civil War, to try to woo them away. And this was the Southern strategy. He thought these people are culturally and politically conservative. They belong in the modern Republican Party of Richard Nixon. And this was crafted by Kevin Phillips, who was a brilliant political strategist, who wrote about the emerging Republican majority. And the way the Republican Party was going to become a majority was to woo away those conservative Southern Democratic voters and make them a part of the new Republican Party. And it was pretty successful. It was a very successful campaign, but it kind of established this idea that, hey, you can use the issue of crime, you can attack Democrats on the issue of crime, and you can appeal to the racism in some of the electorate by using crime as kind of the substitute for, you don't come right out explicitly and talk about it, but you frame it in such a way, riots in the ghetto or whatever phrase you use, we need law and order in society, to try to say that it's African Americans who are the problem with crime, and you white people need to be defended from those black criminals, and the Republican Party is going to do that. Now, that was 50 years ago. And it worked then, and the Republicans kept doing it. And they kept doing it, and they would always attack and weaponize the issue of crime to attack Democrats. Now, one of the most egregious examples of this was the Willie Horton ad in the 1988 campaign, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was always, I mean, he didn't seem like the kind of guy who would stoop to this, but he did in the campaign, egged on by some of his campaign advisors. But they ran the infamous Willie Horton ad. Governor Dukakis had, in his state, there was a program to let certain criminals out early on good behavior, a program, a furlough program. And one of the people released in that program went on a rampage and raped and killed some people in another state, not in Massachusetts. But they seized on that. Okay, see, Dukakis is weak on crime. He's responsible for this program. He's responsible for Willie Horton. And they had pictures of Willie Horton, not the great baseball player from the Detroit Tigers, by the way. I should point that out. The great Willie Horton of the Detroit Tigers had nothing to do with this. This was a different man with that name. But the Willie Horton ad has become infamous. Criminologists still, to this day, analyze the impact of the Willie Horton ad for the way in which it weaponized crime and explicitly tied crime to the issue of racism in the society. So that was where, and of course some Democrats basically said, we're not going to take this anymore. And when Bill Clinton ran in '92, excuse me, he said, I'm not going to let them do that to me. I'm not going to be weak on crime. And so he advocated for the death penalty, and he said he was going to put 100,000 police officers on the street. And he said, look, Democrats have to respond. We've got to be as tough on crime. And of course, most of the things that are advocated are worthless as far as dealing with crime. They're not going to solve the crime problem. But nonetheless, you have to be for the death penalty. You have to be for more cops on the street, and you have to be for a very tough criminal justice system, even though a harsh and ineffective criminal justice system does nothing to prevent crime, as criminologists would tell you. And so, but this was the point. But Clinton and then other Democrats, I think, sort of got the message. But now we're back to this, right? We're back to the same thing, the modern Republican Party, the Trump Party. Trump tried to use the issue of crime. I mean, Trump tried to say the United States is descending into, destructive hell of crime. When there was no evidence to support this, by the way. In fact, crime started dropping in the mid-'90s, and it dropped steadily for quite a few years. Only recently has it creeped back up in some areas. And of course, in 2020, there were more increases than we had been used to. But we're way, way, way below where we were in 1994. Crime is way down. Violent crime is way down compared to the mid-1990s, which was the peak of the violent crime epidemic. And so for now, the Republicans to come back and seize on this issue, but part of it is because of the George Floyd murders, right? Mm-hmm. They said, okay, in the protest, in protesting the George Floyd murder by Minneapolis police officer, there were some destructive acts that took place. Not very many. No. If you really look at the evidence, there was very little violence, but they seized on the little violence that there was in conjunction with those protests to smear everybody who was involved, to smear Black Lives Matter. Again, to weaponize the crime issue with this racial tinge to it, right? Not even a tinge, a pretty emphatic emphasis on race. And now in this campaign, that's what we see, right? Time and time and time again, you see people who are using the crime issue to try to attack their Democratic opponents and running pictures of what the little violence that did take place during the Black Lives Matter protests, and to say that their opponent is out to defund the police. That was a very unfortunate phrase that came out of the George Floyd episode. Some people call for defunding the police. What they meant by that was shifting funds to things that will reduce crime, to provide more equality in the society and greater social support. But that got lost in the shuffle, right? Defunding the police sounds very scary. Take the police away. And so, and some Republican candidates have gone so far as to take photographs of their opponent wearing a particular kind of T-shirt, maybe a campaign T-shirt or some other, and then imposing a defund the police message on it, as if they were wearing a T-shirt that said defund the police. I mean, how dishonest can you get? I mean, that's just truly deceptive and outrageous. But that's how some Republicans are acting. And it's no better if you portray your opponent in your campaign ads as being for defunding the police when they're not. They've never said that, or to be that they're supporting the rioters. And again, that's simply not true. I don't know of any Democratic candidate running for office who was an advocate for defunding the police or who supported the rioters and said the rioters should do what they did. So again, it's these lies, these distortions, these deceptive tactics that just drive criminologists crazy because it completely obscures all the facts about crime. Crime has not gone up in 2021. I mean, that's the latest statistics that we have, the FBI statistics and the crime reporting system. We don't see any dramatic increase in crime in 21 compared to 20. Now, there were some increases in 2020, but again, we don't see any dramatic rise this year, and we don't have the statistics in for this year, 2022 yet. But again, there's not been this dramatic increase in crime, and it's been very uneven. Some cities see it, other cities don't. And again, there are probably a lot of other factors related to the pandemic and the economy that explain some of that violence. And of course, some of the things that really cause the violence, like the excess number of guns floating around in the society, and the structural inequality in our society, and the harsh and ineffective criminal justice tactics, all of those things that really do contribute to violent crime. It's a great book by Elliott Curie on violent crime that I use in my classes, by the way, that analyzes the things that really are responsible and the things that are not responsible. But this is it just drives me crazy. So I'm sorry I went on this rant, but
it's important.
It really drives criminologists crazy to see how the crime issue and distortions about the crime issue are used as a weapon in political campaigns. And it's been going on for a very, very long time, and it's always been wrong to do so and always been deceptive to do so. And we've seen just a resurgence of that kind of tactic in this campaign.
And you're seeing some of that in the gubernatorial campaign right here in Michigan, where the Republican candidate is saying that the current governor, Whitmer, has a terrible relationship with the police, which is totally untrue, and that she's soft on crime, and there's wild in the streets, and she's not doing anything about it, and it's totally distorted.
Yes, total distortion. Well, what are some of the other campaign ad issues that you have noticed that have bothered you or you think are deceptive? We've talked a little bit about the abortion issue. That's certainly one of them.
I think the whole issue about the economy is distorted. That Biden has done nothing. Biden has done a huge amount to deal with the economy. And he's put money into the hands of people. He's worked to change the whole employment structure. He's invested in infrastructure. There are things that are beyond his control, and one of them is the price of oil. He cannot control the price of oil in the country. But when it goes up at the gas pump, he's blamed for that. I think that's one of the most powerful arguments against him, because you see that every day, that you're driving down the street and you see how much oil is going, how much the price of gas is going up. But there's very little the president can do about that. But it's distorted to blame him for what's going on. Of course, the other side doesn't do anything to say, and here's what we got to do, any kind of a reasonable solution. No, we don't see any of that.
Yes, the inflation has been one of those issues that the Republicans have really seized on during this campaign. Of course, inflation is a worldwide problem.
Right.
In fact, if you look at most of the major countries around the world, they have higher inflation rates than we do here in the United States.
Right.
We have one of the lower ones, actually, among the major economies. So it's a worldwide problem. It could be because I heard something about there might be a war going on over in Europe someplace, right? That might have disrupted. And the Saudis just, poke a stick in Biden's eye by saying that they were going
They're not going to produce
any more oil to help. They want to drive the price up even more. So there are lots of other things, geopolitical maneuvering out there that has a much greater impact on gasoline prices than anything Joe Biden has done or not done.
Yeah.
And yet this is a constant refrain of the Republican attacks. And again, this is very deceptive. It's not presenting the issue in its true historical and social context. It's not providing all the relevant information about the causes of inflation or, again, the relationship of inflation to these other geopolitical events. And again, it's just one of those deceptive things. Now, again, we kind of expect that TV ads are going to have some puffery to them, right?
Yeah.
You know, and they're going to attack the opponent. But again, these are just really hardcore lies and distortions that are being used to advance the agenda. And I want to call out Sinclair.
Oh.
Sinclair Broadcasting, which owns Channel 3,
Yes.
WWMT here in Kalamazoo. They're one of the worst offenders.
They are.
They are really, really horrible. And if you watch Channel 3 and you see, and again, it's not the local people I'm talking about here. I'm talking about they have to run these national reports,
reporters, right.
And so they throw it to their national reports, and they're always extremely biased. They're always thinly disguised attacks on Biden and the Democrats. And they have a rotating list of issues to use here. Crime is certainly one of them, right? And again, the same kinds of distortions about the crime issue are presented in these national reports from the Sinclair reporters. But inflation,
Yep.
boy, if they don't run a story on inflation every night, it's every other night, right? Always inflation, 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 inflation. And again, never presenting the true context of what's
Right.
causing inflation or
Yeah.
the fact that other countries are experiencing inflation. It's always a thinly disguised attack on Biden.
Yeah.
Right, and they're a little more sophisticated than Fox. They're not as clownish
No,
or
no.
ham-handed in their attacks as Fox is. So they're a little more sophisticated, and that's why it's even more dangerous. I think that they are a little, you know, they appear to be a little bit more objective in
Right,
presenting the
right.
analysis.
Yeah.
But it really has an impact. In fact, there's some academic research by political scientists on Sinclair and its impact on changing viewers' attitudes. And there was a study done in Journal of Political Communication a couple of years ago. And it basically says that, again, Sinclair focuses on more national topics, presents some of the right-wing slant, a pro-Republican directive, and the evidence that they found in their study is that it does change viewers' attitudes. In this case, it changed viewers' attitudes toward President Obama during his tenure in office, makes viewers less likely to vote for the Democratic nominee for president. And so it has an impact, and Sinclair knows they have a powerful megaphone voice.
Right. Sure.
They know they're having an impact, and that's why they do it. So they're political ideologues supporting the Republican Party, and they use their platform and they own so many local stations like Channel 3.
Yes. They keep buying
They
more.
broadcast this message, and there's academic research to show that they do have this right-wing slant, and that this slant does have an impact on attitudes of voters in the community.
Yeah, I think another area is immigration and the way immigrants are portrayed, and we do need a total revision of our immigration policy, but getting that through Congress has been the problem, and that has to be dealt with. But they always present it as a colossal failure of the Biden administration. But there have been proposals laid before Congress to change that, and the Republicans don't want anything to do with it.
Right, right. So crime, inflation, immigration. Those are the big three. And if you watch Sinclair News, you know that their national reports every night are probably going to hit on one of those
Right.
three issues, always in an attempt to influence the larger political discourse that's going on in the community and in the society. And again, I want to make something very clear here. I think that the Democratic Party has major problems.
Oh.
I think that, I'm not, I think President Biden has some major issues that as a progressive, as a liberal, that I'm upset with, and I would argue, that things need to change. But again, I think there can be fair commentary, there can be fair critique of what the current president is doing or what his party is doing in their control of Congress. I think there are some very legitimate issues that could be raised. And there are some very thoughtful conservatives out there who are raising those issues and engaging in that kind of conversation. And I welcome that. I welcome a thoughtful discussion and analysis from a conservative perspective on this administration, on the Democratic Party, on the issues of the day. I think that's important and I think that's necessary. But that's not what you get from Sinclair. That's not what you get from Fox. That's not what you get from these attack ads. And that's what drives me up a wall. You know, if you're in favor of focusing on the facts and an objective kind of analysis and a fair debate and discussion about how to proceed in terms of policy, that's one thing, but that's not what you get with the distortions, the corruption of the information ecosphere.
It would be interesting if we had an election that really talked about the issues facing the country. But when you look at the issues that are facing the country, and you start to wonder, climate change.
Right.
Who's talking about climate change?
The most important issue of all.
The most important issue
and
of
it's
our
not
time.
being discussed.
Who's talking about economic inequality in the country, which is stratospheric out of proportion? Nobody's talking about that. Who's talking about health care? Who's talking about mental health care? I have students in my class, graduate students who are working in the mental health system, and they tell me horror stories about what's happening with mental health. Nobody talks about that. Foreign policy. Okay, so here's the situation with Russia and Ukraine, but it's much deeper than that. And what is going on around the world? Yesterday, I met with a group of social workers from Romania. That's the poorest country in the European Union. They're getting 1,000 refugees a day into Romania. They have 1 million refugees in Romania, the poorest country in. Is the answer to that just more weapons, or do we have to look deeper to see what is going on in the world, and how can we work? None of that is being talked about in this campaign at all.
Right, yeah. Well, the elections are coming up soon. Regena, what are some of the races that we should be looking at here in Michigan, and issues that we should be focusing on?
Yeah, of course, the big one is the gubernatorial race, and we have, polar opposites here, particularly when it comes to education issues. So we have one side that wants to privatize it, using policies to make sure that parents can use vouchers and use state funding to send their kids to private schools, right, charter schools, home schools, all of those sorts of things. They want more control over the curriculum, what teachers teach, how different issues are presented. It's that culture war that's playing out, and being very clear that if they are elected, this is what we'll see more of. And also the issue when we talk about violence and gun violence in schools, that they have an extreme way of making sure that we take more money and put armed people in schools, right, to address this issue. So that's one path that we can go down. On the other side, our governor is very pro-education, pro-public education, and is trusting of teachers to do the right thing and to be the specialists and the experts on what children should be taught and how they should be taught, and how do we support them more. Increasing more funding for education so we have more support people in the classrooms to help with some of the mental health issues that you were just talking about. All these important things that we need. Yeah. So when we look at education, there's a clear divide on where we can go depending on who's elected as our governor, and that's very concerning to educators. Yeah. And so I think we're seeing it here, but then it also plays out now on school boards, because there's an organized way of getting these people who know nothing about schools, but because they have conservative views and the time, and people are funding them to run for school boards, to also make sure it happens at this level. So for education, it's a very scary time. We're at a crossroads of which way we can go for the future of public education. And so I think this will be one of the most important elections that we're facing right now.
Right, right. Yeah. I think another really big one for me is the economy. The Republicans keep talking about cutting the budget. Cutting the budget when we have such needs here in this state. I met last week with the director of KC Ready Fours, and about importance of early childhood. We all know about the importance of early childhood education. I didn't realize that there are 7 states now that have universal early childhood education. That would pay dividends to this state, incredible dividends to this state. There's a new book out by Richard Reeves, who he works at the Brookings Institute, and he studies social mobility. And the book is called Of Boys and Men. And he's talking about how boys are not succeeding in our society. He looked at the Kalamazoo Promise. He came here and spent time with the Kalamazoo. And what he found is this. Since the Kalamazoo Promise has gone into force, the number of girls who have graduated from college is up almost 50%. The number of boys who have graduated from college is flat. We have this enormous resource here, and we have to find a way, and that's going to cost money to invest in the supports that are needed for boys and young men to succeed. But they keep talking about cutting the budget, which means cutting the supports that we need for people to succeed in this society.
We also have a couple of other important statewide races. One's for Attorney General, and that one's a pretty critical one, and Secretary of State. Jocelyn Benson, Secretary of State, is running for re-election. Dana Nessel, Attorney General, is running for re-election. Both are facing Trump-supported candidates who I think pose very critical dangers to how we run our elections in the state of Michigan and how we enforce the laws in our state. And again, two more extremist candidates running against the incumbents at the state level. So those are races that we're hoping to keep an eye on here. We also have 3 important proposals. We've talked a little bit about the abortion proposal, Proposal 3. Anything to add to that, Regena?
Yeah, it's just making sure that I know with the ads out there saying it's too confusing, it's too extreme. We've seen those signs in yards to make people question it. But just to be clear, we are trying to restore what we lost with Roe versus Wade. So we need to make sure that by passing Proposal 3, that we do have that reproductive freedom right, that people can make choices about their reproductive care. And that's like beyond abortion. I mean, that has to do with prenatal care, postpartum care, miscarriages, all of those things, fertility. All of these things need to be protected and supported. So once you take those rights away from people, it does become very extreme in the other way. So we're trying to find that balance where the decisions are made by the people who are impacted by it. And that's what's most important. And I think both sides, if they really thought about this, that's what they ultimately want, not one controlling the other, but that people have that choice. And that's what we want people to support.
So yes on 3.
Yes on 3.
Don, we also have Proposal 1.
Yeah, Proposal 1's interesting because that is a proposal that didn't come from the people. It came from the legislature. The legislature put that on the ballot. And there are really 2 parts to Proposal 1. Michigan has term limits on the number of people that can serve in the Michigan House and in the Senate, the Michigan Senate. Right now, a person can serve 3 terms in the House, and that's 6 years. And then they could also serve, if they were elected, 2 terms in the Senate, and each of those terms will be 4 years. So you could serve now for 10 years. The proposal that's on the ballot would up that you could serve a total of 12 years. So you could serve all 12 years in the House if you wanted, or 3 years in the Senate, whichever way, but you could have a 12-year limit. Now, anybody that is elected this year will not be bound by this rule. It will be the people that come after this. That's the first part of that. The second part is transparency, where all elected officials will have to review their economic situation. And it's quite extensive. You have to review where your money came from, who donated to you, where do you work, all these different things. Michigan is rated 50th in the country in transparency on letting people know the economic situation of its legislators. And so this is an effort to try to change that. And I think both those things are worthwhile.
So yes on one.
I think yes on one.
Yeah, greater transparency is good. We need to know who's funding
Yes.
our politicians, right?
Yes.
Who's trying to buy their way into power here. And again, I think term limits in general have not always been a good thing.
Yeah,
I think they've had a negative impact.
Obviously, I'm not a great favor of that since I've been elected 11 times. But I don't like term limits.
And we also have Proposal 2, which is a proposal based to deal with voting rights in the state. It would amend the Michigan Constitution to allow 9 days of early voting. It requires state-funded postage for absentee ballots and applications. It would continue to allow registered voters without a state ID to sign an affidavit attesting to their identity so they could still vote. It would allow public sources and charities to fund elections subject to disclosure rule. It would require that military and overseas ballots be counted if postmarked by Election Day. That's an important thing for those folks who are serving. It would require ballot drop boxes for every 15,000 voters. All kinds of, I think, really important things that, again, given the national tendency or trend to restrict voting rights, this is going in the opposite directions, expanding voter rights, making it easier to vote, encouraging more people to get out and to exercise the franchise. And so I think that's really an important proposal as well. So I think yes on Proposal 2, a big yes on Proposal 2.
Yes.
Yes.
So for all three of the proposals that are going to be on the ballot, I think we're all in favor of an emphatic yes for each one of those proposals.
Yes.
Yes for expanding term limits or reforming the term limits idea. Yes for expanding voter rights, and a yes on Proposal 3 to establish reproductive health rights once again since Roe has been overturned. Let's see, what else do we have? The national scene. Let's talk briefly about what's at stake in the national election. And probably the biggest issue there is who's going to be in control of the Congress, right?
Yes. Yes.
And traditionally, the midterm elections favor the party out of power, right? So if a president gets elected in 1 year, 2 years later, usually his party will suffer in the midterm elections. That's been a historical pattern in U.S. politics. And so if that holds, that would mean that the House of Representatives would probably flip back to Republican control, currently controlled by the Democrats. The Senate is, excuse me, the Senate is 50-50, even split right now. And there are a number of key Senate races that will determine whether the Senate remains in Democratic control right now, because the Vice President, Kamala Harris, can break the tie, the 50-50 tie. And if the Republicans would gain back a majority, that would not be possible for that to happen anymore. So control of Congress is the biggest issue here. And it seems like it's a bit of a toss-up right now. Probably, I mean, if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I'd probably bet that the House of Representatives is going to slip back to Republican control. That seems like it's likely to happen. The Senate is just I don't think anybody really knows there.
Right. Yeah. The key races, what? Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio,
Arizona,
and Nevada.
Yes.
I don't know if there's
Wisconsin
other
is another possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, these are tough states. What do you know Ohio? What do you think is going on there?
Well, actually, probably no one gave the Democratic candidate much of a chance in Ohio. It's Tim Ryan, who is a current congressman from Ohio, and he's run a very strong campaign, and he's made it competitive. Right now, it's J.D. Vance, the hillbilly elegy author, who ruthlessly attacked Trump at one point, and then once he decided he wanted to run for office, started to change his tune, let's say, and support the former president.
Discovered his virtues.
Yeah. Kind of a strange flip there. But he's strongly in favor. In fact, it was funny. Trump was there speaking, and he almost was making fun of J.D. Vance for his subservience to Trump. I mean, Trump knew he had him on a leash, and was almost making fun of him at a campaign rally, which was really odd. But anyway, Tim Ryan does have a chance. I mean, it's within the margin of error right now. You know, again, if I were a betting man, probably given the voter trends in Ohio in the last couple of years, Vance probably will survive, but I think Ryan has a chance for an upset there.
Right, yeah, it seems like that. It seems like he's run a strong campaign, and the abortion issue is kind of pushed the Democrats' situation there, yeah.
I think that's the wild card, Regina. The overturning of Roe v. Wade, it seemed to energize a lot of people to get involved in the campaign this fall. Is that a sustaining force? Is that going to have an impact? What do you think?
Hopefully, I do think that is the case. That will get people out to vote, and then to help the Democrats in the long run. I do hope that that's the case. But like we said, that now the other issues are starting to come to the forefront around inflation and crime and all of that. You know, what is on the forefront of people's minds? So we have to keep at it. So I think over this next 2 weeks, the messages that we get out on that to help the Democrats will make a big difference.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania is a big one.
I think the Phillies are going to make the difference, because if they win the pennant, that's just going to do it. You know, it's really, John Fetterman, the candidate, had a stroke. I believe it was the day before the primary election.
Yes.
And so that threw everything into turmoil. But I think Fetterman is a real strong candidate among working people. And he's made a remarkable recovery. There's some challenges there. I think his opponent, Dr. Oz, he's got a lot of problems. For one thing, he mostly has lived in Pennsylvania.
He lives in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
From New Jersey.
Yeah, he came over to run here. And, you know, when they appear on a debate, I mean, Oz has all the advantage. First of all, he's against a guy who's just recovering from a stroke. And secondly, that's what he's done with his life. He's been on television, so he's a master at that. So that's not a good indication of where we're going. But I'm hoping that Fetterman is strong enough to pull it through. I think he is, but I don't know. I don't know.
I think Fetterman has a slight lead in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
He had a bigger lead. It slipped a bit. But it looks like Pennsylvania, again, right now, Fetterman looks like he might be in a position to hold on and win that seat. One of the problems we have here is the inconsistency in polling. I mean, what we've found out in recent years is that the pre-election polls just don't really seem to bear out in the end.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a wild card. We're kind of making prognostications and predictions based on current polling numbers, and yet those just don't seem to be very firm. They seem to be rather soft, and they haven't borne out in the long run. So there's a bit of mystery, I think, about this election. What impact is the decision on Roe going to have? Is it going to mobilize a lot of voters, like you were talking about, Regina? What about young people? How are they going to respond? Are they going to turn out? And if they do, it's probably to the favor of Democratic candidates.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And how are Republicans? I mean, I think there's a real question about Republican voters right now, because Obviously, many of the candidates endorsed by Trump want to mobilize that base, and that's a very powerful base. But I think there are many other Republicans who are given pause. They don't really like the Trump faction and the cultism of Trumpism, and they're concerned about that. And so I think especially suburban women in particular, we've seen in the last couple of elections, have been a bit put off by the Trump faction and will be inclined to cross over and vote against Republican candidates because of that. So how strong is that force going to be? Those are some of the unanswered questions I think that we have about this particular election.
Yeah, I think Georgia is really interesting. And I think Georgia really hits the heart of the problem. Herschel Walker has no business running for the Senate. He's incompetent. He just doesn't understand what's going on there. But he has a really good chance because all they want from Herschel Walker is his vote. And that's what this election really is about. Who's going to control the Senate? And even though in Nevada and in Georgia and in other states, they've got pretty terrible candidates, people are thinking who's going to control the Senate, and that's what really matters.
Yeah, yeah. That is an interesting race to watch. And again, just from as an outsider looking down at Georgia, you would think, well, how in the world can people support Herschel Walker, given all the gaffes, given all the lies, given all the problems with his candidacy. But again, it comes down to, you know, if you're a Republican, you're going to vote for Walker, despite you're going to hold your nose and vote, I guess. And Reverend Warnock has run a very strong campaign.
Yes.
The current senator who's defending his term, and he's been a strong candidate. And I think right now Warnock has a slight lead over Walker. So again, for what that's worth, again, the polling is pretty squishy and inconclusive. Wisconsin's another interesting one. Ron Johnson running against Mandela Barnes. And Barnes has been a very strong African-American man, strong
Yes.
candidate. And Wisconsin's a critical state. Wisconsin's mostly a Democratic state, or slightly Democratic, but it's the Republicans have so rigged the system there with gerrymandering that they control the legislature. But again, I think Barnes has a chance, an outside chance. Right now, Johnson seems to be slightly in the lead there. So again, election night's going to be a long night because so many of these races seem to be toss-ups at this point, and we just don't know. I think there's just a lot of mysteries about this election that are hard to figure out, hard to discern this time around.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think, you know, the final thought I would have about the election is that democracy itself is really at stake here. So many of the Republican candidates are supporters of Trump and supporters of the big lie about the election and are trying to gain control so they can eviscerate voting rights and establish a way in for Trump to come back into office, even if he doesn't win the popular vote in 2024 if he runs. He's giving some strong indications that he is going to run. And to a large extent, a lot of the local elections for Attorney General and other positions are kind of an effort to rig the system for the 2024 election.
Right.
Yes.
And if that happens, that's the end of American democracy.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And so to some extent, to a large extent, it seems to me that democracy itself is at stake in this particular midterm election. Maybe the most important midterm election in a really, really long time.
I think we should say a little bit about the efforts to intimidate people for voting. I mean, I was reading about how in Arizona, at one of the drop boxes, there were people there armed and in military gear standing there and scaring people. And then in Florida, they've been arresting people who, a lot of times they were ex-offenders who believed they had a right to vote and voted in the last election.
And we're allowed to
And
vote.
were allowed to vote. Yeah. Or some of them, yeah, they're trying
And
to.
then on technicalities, they're coming
On
back down and saying, well,
technicalities.
you really weren't eligible to vote.
Yeah,
And
right, right. And all that just scares people and say,
Right.
woo, I'm not going to go out there or arresting people. No. Yeah. I think here in Kalamazoo, I really want to speak up for Scott Boiling, our city clerk, who's done everything he can to make it easy for people to vote here. We got an office for 8 days before the election in Bernhardt Center where people can just vote right there. And he's got these drop boxes. He's done a great job.
Well, that's what people need to do. We really need to strongly encourage people to get out there, to vote. This is the most important thing that you can do right now as a citizen, to get out there and vote. And so again, from all of us here at Critical Issues, we're strongly encouraging you, however you plan to vote, get out there and vote. Participate in our great democracy while we still have one. Right?
Yes,
And
Exactly.
again, democracy seems to be at stake, and so we really want to encourage people to get out there and participate in the electoral process, to get out there and vote. So that's about it from us on this particular program. Again, we're thankful to the Public Media Network for the award that we were given, the important narrative voice that we have. So thank you to the Public Media Network, and we hope that you'll come back and join us again on Critical Issues, Alternative Views.